The forest stood silent, dark, menacing. Whispering pines, they called it. But the wind wasn't what made the trees whisper. It was fear. Deep in the woods, hidden amongst the pines, sat a cabin, forgotten, deserted, a place of shadows and secrets. No one dared go near, except for them.
Ryan, Mia, Tom, and Sarah. Best friends since childhood. Always up for a challenge, always seeking thrills. Tonight, the thrill was whispering pines. I dare you, spend the night. In the cabin.
Fine, but if we hear anything, we're out of there.
The cabin loomed before them, a rotting hulk against the darkening sky. The porch sagged, threatening to collapse. The windows were black eyes, watching their every move. Ryan pushed open the creaking door. The smell hit them first, musty, damp, like something had died inside. Dust motes danced in the faint moonlight filtering through cracks in the walls. The silence was heavy, oppressive, as if the cabin itself was holding its breath, waiting.
This place is creepy.
Look, pointing to a corner.
A rug lay askew, revealing a trapdoor. The trapdoor was old, made of rough-hewn wood. A rusty ring served as a handle. Ryan reached for it, his excitement growing.
Don't! What if something's down there?
Ryan just grinned.
That's the whole point, isn't it?
He pulled the ring. The trapdoor groaned open, releasing a gust of stale, cold air. The smell was worse down there, earthy, putrid. It smelled like death. The stairs were steep and narrow, descending into darkness. Ryan went first, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. Mia followed, her heart pounding against her ribs. Tom and Sarah brought up the rear, their faces pale in the flickering light. The air grew colder as they descended. The smell intensified. The only sound was their own breathing and the soft thud of their footsteps on the wooden steps. The stairs seemed to go on forever. Finally, they reached the bottom. The cellar was small and cramped, its walls closing in like a suffocating embrace. The low ceilings made it feel even more oppressive, as if the weight of the world was pressing down on anyone who dared to enter. The air was thick with dust and the smell of decay, a pungent reminder of the cellar's long-forgotten past. Dust particles floated lazily in a single beam of light that managed to pierce the darkness, illuminating the decaying shelves that lined the walls. But it was the shadows that chilled them to the bone. These were not ordinary shadows cast by objects or people. They seemed to have a life of their own, moving independently of any light source. They danced in the corners, swirling and shifting as if alive. The shadows moved with a fluid grace, their forms constantly changing, morphing into shapes that defied explanation. They writhed on the walls, twisting and turning like tormented souls. It was as if the shadows were trying to communicate, to tell a story that only they knew. But there was nothing to cast them, no objects, no people, nothing that could explain the eerie phenomenon. The shadows existed in a realm of their own, separate from the physical world.
What are those? The question hung in the air, unanswered as the group stared into the darkness, their fear growing with each passing second.
Tom whispered, his voice barely audible. No one answered. The silence was deafening, broken only by the soft rustling of the shadows as they continued their dance. They were all too captivated by the shadows, by their silent, mesmerizing dance. The shadows seemed to draw them in, holding them in a trance-like state. Then the whispering started. It was faint at first, barely more than a murmur. But it grew louder, more insistent. The shadows were speaking, their voices a haunting melody that filled the room. The friends exchanged terrified glances, unsure of what to do. The cellar, once a place of storage and neglect, had become a theater of the unknown, where shadows danced and whispered secrets that no one could understand. Softly at first, then louder, all around them. Whispers carried on the stale air, words they couldn't quite make out, voices filled with sorrow and pain. The shadows danced faster now, their movements frantic, desperate. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. They seemed to be closing in, suffocating them with their grief.
Mia felt a cold hand grip her arm. She screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the darkness. The shadows swirled around them, a vortex of fear and despair. They were trapped.
We have to do something. We can't just sit here and let this curse consume us. We need to act now before it's too late.
Sarah cried, her tears streaming down her face, reflecting the dim light of the room. She felt the weight of the curse pressing down on her, suffocating her spirit. Her voice was high-pitched, frantic. The sound echoed through the dark room, amplifying the sense of dread that hung in the air like a thick fog.
Ryan shone his flashlight around the cellar, his face pale and drawn. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing shadows that seemed to dance and shift with a life of their own. His eyes landed on something on the wall, a symbol, etched into the stone. It looked ancient, powerful, a curse. This place, it's cursed. The symbol seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy as if it were alive and aware of their presence.
Mia remembered something her grandmother used to say. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind, a distant memory that now seemed so vital. A curse can be broken with a chant. The words of the chant were ancient, passed down through generations, a secret weapon against the darkness.
They huddled together, their fear momentarily forgotten. They had to try. The room was filled with a tense silence, each person feeling the gravity of the moment. It was their only hope. The glimmer of hope in their eyes was faint but undeniable, a spark that refused to be extinguished by the surrounding darkness. They closed their eyes and began to chant, their voices joining together in a desperate plea for release. The chant started softly, a murmur that grew louder and more confident with each passing second. The air seemed to vibrate with the power of their collective will, a force that pushed back against the curse that sought to consume them. As they chanted, they could feel the atmosphere in the room begin to change. The oppressive weight of the curse seemed to lift slightly, replaced by a sense of unity and purpose. They were no longer just individuals trapped in a nightmare. They were a united front, fighting back against the darkness. The chant continued, each word a beacon of hope, each voice a testament to their determination. They knew that breaking the curse would not be easy, but in that moment, they believed it was possible. The power of their combined voices filled the room, creating a shield of light that pushed back against the shadows. They chanted with all their might, their voices rising in a crescendo of hope and defiance. And as the final words of the chant echoed through the room, they felt a shift, a release, as if the curse had finally been broken. As soon as the last word left their lips, the shadows recoiled. The whispering stopped. It was as if the very air had been holding its breath, waiting for that moment. The forest, which had been alive with sinister murmurs, fell into an eerie silence. The shadows, once menacing and close, seemed to pull back, retreating into the depths of the dark woods. Silence descended, heavy and absolute. It was a silence that pressed down on them, making every rustle of leaves and snap of twigs sound like thunder. The oppressive quiet was almost worse than the whispering, filling their hearts with a dread that was hard to shake off. They didn't waste a second. Scrambling up the stairs, their feet pounded against the wooden steps, echoing in the stillness. Panic fueled their movements, each step a desperate attempt to put distance between themselves and the unseen terror that lurked behind. They didn't stop running until they were out of the cabin, bursting through the door and into the night. The cold air hit their faces, a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere inside. They could feel the weight of the cabin's malevolence lifting slightly as they fled into the open. Back in the relative safety of the woods, they paused, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. The trees, though dark and foreboding, offered a semblance of protection. The dense foliage seemed to shield them from the eyes they felt watching from the cabin. They collapsed on the forest floor, gasping for breath, their bodies trembling with fear and exhaustion. The adrenaline that had propelled them forward was now ebbing away, leaving them weak and vulnerable. The ground was cold and unyielding, but it was a welcome respite from the terror they had just escaped. Their bodies trembling with fear and exhaustion, they huddled together, seeking comfort in each other's presence. The darkness around them seemed to close in, but the warmth of their companionship provided a small beacon of hope. They knew they had to keep moving, but for now, they needed to gather their strength. The woods seemed darker now, the silence more profound. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every rustle a potential danger. The forest, once a place of refuge, now felt like a labyrinth of fear. The silence was not just an absence of sound, but a presence in itself, heavy and oppressive. They had escaped the cabin, but the sense of unease lingered. The memory of the shadows and the whispering voices haunted them, a reminder of the danger that still lurked. They moved cautiously, every step a reminder of the peril they had narrowly avoided. But something told them they hadn't escaped the shadows. The feeling of being watched persisted, an invisible gaze that followed their every move. They glanced back frequently, half expecting to see the shadows creeping closer. The night was far from over, and the true test of their courage was just beginning. They never spoke of that night again. But the memory lingered, a shadow in the backs of their minds. They couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed them home from the woods, a presence that watched them from the darkness, that whispered their names on the wind. The shadows were still out there, waiting, and they knew deep down that their encounter with the cabin in Whispering Pines wasn't over. It was just the beginning.